World Hour of Power here with Lady Pauline and Mr. Glenn Greenwich, our Honorable Mayor of Suffolk Boulevard. Glenn, who do we have today as your guest?
We have a special guest, Dr. Simon Zysman, right? Did I get it close?
Zysman.
Zysman. And he's going to be giving us a little conversation. You know, a lot of people are dealing with heroin and opioid epidemic, and he's got a particular treatment and a program. So we want to talk a little bit about that and find out a little bit about what can be done. So first of all, welcome to the show.
Well, it's a pleasure to be here, and thank you for inviting me.
You're quite welcome.
You're very welcome. So let's go back a little history. So how did you get started in this field?
Well, I got started in the field of addiction when I was working at a place called Kings Park Psychiatric Center. It's a New York State psychiatric hospital.
Okay.
And while I was working in the admissions unit, which was the Smithtown Huntington unit,
Okay.
I did a survey with the patients. It was about 1982. And I discovered that approximately 60% of the patients had drug and alcohol related problems. Back in the 1980s, prior to 1988, drug addiction was classified as a mental illness. And, but there were really no adequate services available in the community, and the medical community has not really gotten involved in treating addiction.
Okay.
They just focused on the mental health issues. So what we ended up doing is I started a program at the hospital in 1982, and then we developed an outpatient program called Employee Assistance Resource Services. The acronym for that is EARS. And we started that in May of 1986 in order to address the drug problem.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of my colleagues were very cynical about the whole idea of setting up a substance abuse treatment for a population with such poor outcomes. Because what happened was these patients would come into the hospital. They would, in essence, detox, but they didn't tell us that they had a drug problem. And then they would be discharged, and shortly after, they would be readmitted after they relapsed.
So you was having like a revolving door.
Right, they became known as the revolving door patients, mentally ill chemical abusers. And when a patient who has a drug problem is admitted to a psychiatric hospital, the therapeutic community programs like Apple, which was a program out there, Phoenix House, they refused, in many cases, they rejected these patients because they've already been hospitalized in a psychiatric unit. So they really didn't have a place to go to get the help that they needed. So we started our program as a medically supervised outpatient substance abuse treatment program licensed by the Office of Alcoholism and Substance Abuse Services, but in those days, the two were divided.
Yes.
So it was known as the Division of Substance Abuse Services.
Wow.
Years later, they were combined, and now, you know, they all fall under one umbrella.
Yes.
Finally, yeah.
Right. So we started the program in 1986. All of my colleagues thought that it would be an absolute failure. We were so unsuccessful with them with the inpatient. How the heck are they going to succeed in outpatient? Well, surprisingly, 67% of the patients responded to the treatment. And as a result, in 1988, our clinic became third-party reimbursable, and addiction became known as a disease in its own right, similar to alcoholism. And by, I guess, 1989, 1990, just about every community in the United States developed similar type of programs. And as a result, many of the patients who used to go, 100% of the patients used to go inpatient, and now since 2/3 were being effectively treated on an outpatient basis, only 1/3 went in. And as a result, many of the inpatient facilities ended up going belly up. You know, they went bankrupt.
Okay. Now,
I don't know
did
if you remember that back in the, it would be around 1989, 1990, it started
Sure.
happening.
Yes, I know.
Sure.
It was big. Little did I know that it could have that kind of a ripple effect with little people.
Let me ask you this.
You know?
Did you find that a lot of your patients were working addicts, or were they just on the street, or what was the profile look like?
It was actually a combination.
Okay.
But what we ended up doing initially that was different is we did not prescribe any medicines to them that were addictive in nature.
Good.
Because when you gave a patient an addictive medicine, then that leads to a relapse. So we did away with that and just prescribed medicines that were non-addictive for them. And that seemed to make a
What was some of
difference.
that medication that you prescribed?
Well, we're talking about psychiatric meds.
Yes.
Oh, okay.
These were primarily for patients who are, in those days, you know, marijuana was big, not that it's not big today,
Right,
but
right.
marijuana, cocaine. You also had the issue with the benzodiazepines, you know, like Xanax and Klonopin, Valiums. Valiums were very popular.
Black beauties, right? They call them black beauties.
They had the black beauties also,
Yeah.
Oh,
sure.
I remember those.
Yeah.
You know, people were into speed and
Sure,
so on.
exactly, yeah.
So then but we noticed that heroin, opiates, became more and more prevalent over time.
Mhm.
And now it's become the dominant drug that has been killing a lot of our young people as well as our older people. And it was very surprising to find out that many of them got started when they developed some kind of an injury, let's say an auto accident, they hurt their back, the
Yeah.
doctor prescribes pain medicine and physical therapy. After a while, they build up a tolerance to the opiates. And before you know it, the doctor won't prescribe that much for them anymore. So
Say
now they
that
had to
again.
turn to the street. And they, you know, turned to heroin because it was a cheaper form of,
Morphine or whatever, right?
yeah, in terms of accessibility
Sure.
in, you know, on the street. So this is the way things evolved.
Now, what time frame would you say that turned around? What period of time did you notice that it was alarming, but hadn't hit quite the epidemic state, but it was trending up?
Well, let me share this with you. When we first started working with opioid addicts, our success rate was so poor, it was terrible. It was like, I mean, at our best, without using a medication-assisted treatment, it was like 3 to 5%. That means 3 to 5 people out of 100.
Wow.
To me, that sounded terrible.
Yeah.
But the state average was 2%.
Okay, so you're still beating the stage. Wow.
But that's
Okay.
nothing to be, you know,
Right,
it's nothing
yeah,
to be
no,
proud of, you
True,
know? So I think it was around 2007.
okay.
I was introduced to this doctor who also provided training for other doctors. His name was Michael Eisenberg, and he invited me to lunch. So we sat down, we had lunch, and we told him, listen, we're not really doing very well with our opiate addiction patients. And he says, well, there's this new thing called buprenorphine, Suboxone, that he's been using. And he'd like us to become
Involved.
more, you know, more
Familiar with
involved,
it.
more educated on the
Yeah.
subject.
Mhm.
So he persuaded, and I figured, well, we're not doing so terrific with our patients, so let me try sending him a patient. So I sent him a patient, and it turned out to be a positive outcome. So I thought, well, one, you know,
Let's try
well, let me
another one.
try a second one. We sent him a second one, and lo and behold, it's 2 for 2. We sent him a third one, now it's 3 for 3. Well, I got together with the doctors in our office, and we decided that we're going to get ourselves certified, but we didn't know how to do the induction. That means the detox, the
Part of it.
ambulatory detox part of it.
Okay.
So it took us about a year to get comfortable with it, and then we started doing it, and we were having, the improvement was, it jumped from 3 to 5% to 70 to 90%.
Awesome.
That's a big
So
jump.
that was outrageous, you
Yeah.
know? So, and we continued to have a high performance, but I didn't think we were doing anything different than the other clinics. And then I was approached by someone from the state. They told us, look, I don't know what you're doing, but whatever it is, you know, your
Exactly.
patients seem to be doing very well, and I'd like you to write it up. Maybe you can write a book, uh, something so that we can distribute this information to other clinics so they can have similar outcomes.
This here happens to be your book called Successful Heroin and Opiate Addiction Treatment.
Yes, that's correct.
And how long have this book been out?
Well, I did a presentation before the New York State Senate Task Force on Heroin and Opioid Addiction in April of 2016. It took 2 years to do the books. I didn't come out until July of 2018. So it's less than a year. Well,
And
it's almost a year.
And where is it available? Is it available on Amazon and all the local places?
It's available on Amazon.
Okay.
Amazon, and it's also available under Zysman.com.
Okay.
And if you go to that particular site, it'll lead you there.
Now let me ask you this: is this book geared for doctors, or for lay people can actually read it and get something out of it as well?
It's geared both for the professional as well as for the layperson, also for the addict's family, so they better understand the disease and how to treat it. Because what happens is, many of the patients who get on the buprenorphine are taken off of it too quickly, and as a result, they relapse. And
Okay.
many cases, you know, may even overdose. I mean, last year, the overdose rate hit over 70,000
Yeah, I know.
for the entire nation, which is outrageous.
So how long are they actually on this treatment?
It varies.
Successfully.
Well, it varies depending on their level of involvement.
Okay.
Because one of the things that's so terrific about it is when a patient comes to us, you have to provide the treatment properly. You know, the patient has to be drug-free for 24 hours or more. They're in acute withdrawal.
Okay.
We initiate the medication, and generally within an hour or two, they experience 60% relief, which is tremendous.
Oh, that's wonderful.
And within
That's
2 to
awesome.
4 weeks, they're functioning relatively normally, and they're able to resume work and everything else without disruption and without having to go inpatient. What's been happening is they go into a detox,
Mm-hmm.
they start them off on the medicine, and then they wean them off within 14 days. You know, anywhere from, I guess, 5 to 14 days. And they're discharged without medication. Well, most of them relapse within an hour of discharge.
Sure.
So what have we accomplished?
Right.
You know, a lot of money invested, but this has been, they've been using the alcohol model and applying it to opioid addiction. So as a result, if you keep using that as your frame of reference, you know, it's a totally different drug, requires a totally different approach. So when you initiate medication-assisted treatment with the patient,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
the success rate is very high. Now, if you're providing talk therapy, you know, counseling,
Right.
without MAT, which is medication-assisted treatment, the relapse rate is greater than 80%. They've guesstimated it as high as 92%. So
So
what
you
do we?
need both.
Yeah, that's exactly the point. So I was bringing that part out. And in some cases, if they need to stay on it longer, let them stay on it longer. Now, the other thing I also brought out is about the dynamics of addiction, opioid addiction. It's different from other types of addiction in the sense that from the time you stop using, it takes about, there's a thing called dopamine.
Yes.
So when the dopamine,
In the
as,
brain, the
right, as
chemical
you're
reaction, right.
taking pain medications, you're flooding the brain with dopamine.
Mm-hmm.
So when you flood the brain with dopamine, the brain cuts back on the natural production of dopamine.
Right.
And as a result, what happens is the patient goes into withdrawal. So the less and less dopamine naturally produced, the more severe the addiction. So with those patients, it takes about 90 days before the brain will start producing it again. And it takes 6 months to 2 years to get back to normal.
6 months to 2 years.
Yeah.
Wow.
And this
But
is
the
done-
person lives and they're living productive lives with their families and, you know,
And this
it's
is done
been-
on an outpatient basis.
yes,
That's
done
wonderful.
outpatient without having to rely on
That's a
inpatient
big
care.
deal. That's a big deal.
That's
So-
wonderful.
Yeah, and it worked out very well for us, but even better for the patients. So
Yes.
when I wrote the book, I included the piece about the dynamics of opioid addiction, and I couldn't leave out the patients. So we have like 32 testimonials in there, because you could read a book and say, well, how do I know it works? Well,
Yeah, there it is.
right,
The
the,
proof is in the pudding, huh?
the
As they
patients
say.
speak for themselves, and they tell you what kind of, dysfunctional lives they've been living, and how it impacted their families and so on, and now their families are back. Because what the biggest problem many families have is they feel helpless about being able to help.
To
They
help
do
them, sure.
everything, they put the money in, they send them to rehab, $40,000, whatever, and they come out of rehab and they
And-
relapse,
and they
and they
relapse.
can't figure out,
Yeah.
Now, let me ask you this, is
You
this
can't
treat-
just say no and expect somebody to stop.
True, true. Now, this treatment is a national treatment, is this just locally?
Well, I must give Governor Cuomo a lot of credit,
Okay.
because he has really been on the
Stepping up
forefront
on
of
it.
dealing with this opioid addiction. And after my book came out, I'm not saying it's because of it, they put out a major drive, Oasis, on educating all counselors on medication-assisted treatment. And then they also came out with a best practice policy, which indicates that you keep the patient on their medicine, and in order to stop the death rate.
Well, he also did a little further, because he actually has a program that he's funding specifically for the opioid area.
Yes,
In
exactly.
fact, Joseph Adabo Family Health Center was one of the only agencies to actually receive some of that funding specifically for this opioid. So what you're saying basically is New York has taken the forefront. What about the rest of the states?
New York is the leader in the treatment of opioid addiction, and
That's great.
Now, can you see this going worldwide? I mean, because the
Absolutely.
opioid addiction is all over the world.
it's a worldwide problem.
Right.
People get addicted to opiates. Initially, it may be by a doctor prescribing it,
The painkillers.
not realizing that the patient may potentially become addicted. Now the medical schools, only recently, believe it or not, are being educated about
Addiction.
addiction. Can you believe?
Just
it's
Just
hard to
now,
believe.
just
Just-
now.
Really?
Absolutely.
Wow.
I think years ago they had, believe 10 hours of actual knowledge about addiction. That was it.
Yeah,
Years
and
ago.
many doctors did not believe that addiction even exists. I know
Gotta
it
be
sounds,
kidding
I know,
me.
no, I'm not kidding you, this is real.
Wow. Wow.
So this has come a long way now and I was able to break it down in terms of explaining the dynamics of it, how to treat it, and also by including the patients, it helped to, because what it also helps the patients do is relate to different stories that different people have in
Well, this
terms
is-
of their life experience. The guy was an engineer and becomes addicted to pain medication when he hurt his back on the job. They put him on medication and refer him for physical therapy, and before you know it,
One thing
the
leads to
tolerance
another.
increases and
Yeah.
he can't get any medicine, so he has to turn to the street to buy his pain meds.
Yeah.
Well, doctor, tell the audience how they can reach you.
They can reach me by, the phone number is 631-361-6960.
Okay.
Again, 631-361-6960, and we're located at 278 East Main Street in Smithtown, New York, 11787. And we have the outpatient program there. We have a number of doctors that can provide the buprenorphine medicine as well. And they're all knowledgeable and experienced. And they all love working at the clinic because they have such positive outcomes with patients who normally
That's a good feeling.
do not succeed, you know.
Yes.
And the name of the
So
book
it's
again
very
is
rewarding.
The Successful Heroin and Opioid Addiction Treatment.
That is correct, yes.
And it's available,
It's available on Amazon.com
okay,
and SimonZysman.com. If you go to that site, it'll lead you to the book, and you could purchase it right on Amazon.
and it's recommended for the families, for the patient, and for other doctors and professionals who are in the industry to looking to get a better understanding of what's available and how opioid and heroin treatment addiction could be treated.
Yes, and it's very rewarding for me as a doctor to be able to see dramatic improvement over such a relatively short period of time with a population that other people are clueless about how to treat.
That's
You know?
wonderful.
Wow, that's awesome.
Well, thank you so much, Doctor, for being on Our World, Our Power. And I'd like to also say you're listening to Our World. Please check us out on Instagram. Also check us out on Facebook, Spotify, iTunes, TuneIn, Google Play, and most definitely Caribbean Buzz
Buzz TV.
Radio and TV.
That's right.
And Glenn, how can people reach you if they need to?
They can reach me at info@sutphin, SUTPHIN, So that's Sutphin Boulevard Business Improvement District.
All right. Again, where your news reflects you and your community. See you all next week.
Signing out. And thank you, Doctor, for being on the show and for leading the charge to impact an area that has not been impacted. And it's great to hear that New York and you, with your treatment, is helping so many people.
Well, I thank you very much for giving me the opportunity to share this information with the general public and for making them aware that there is successful treatment available for opioid addiction.
Thank
Okay.
you.
Thank you.